So let's go straight into Europe and pick up what the ECB has done. The European Central Bank has increased its interest rates after many years of just holding back. Interest rates going up like this in the European region, what do they indicate to you? What kind of a politically sound move is that?
Well, in Europe you have a different problem, because in Europe you now have two-speed Europe. You have got a big division between the countries that have a trade surplus and no great debt, and other countries that have had a big housing boom, which has left very big debts, and they are now suffering from the weight of that debt. And it's all the fault of the euro, because the euro was supposed to bring about convergence. Actually, by bringing interest rates closer together, it created housing booms and the runaway sort of reduced competitiveness in the weaker countries. At the same time, the strongest country, Germany, was suffering the after effects of reunification. So they were improving their competitiveness. So there's been a big discrepancy. Instead of convergence, you have divergence, and this is now being cast in stone by the arrangements that in the reorganization.
So let's talk about the European situation. I mean, you keep talking about this whole issue around Portugal, and then you've got Germany. I have, of course, heard your comments on Germany, and in many ways you're criticizing Germany for actually cashing into the situation rather than helping other nations out. Now, what would you like to blame Germany in a state like this? You know that Portugal, much needy for debt, etc., is in a spot, but why blame Germany?
Well, I am blaming Germany because their politicians have misled the people. Because effectively, Germany has been bailing out, let's say, Greece, and is willing to bail out Portugal in order to protect its own banking system. So it's really protecting its own banks, and so people are misled and thinking that they are somehow bailing out Greece and Portugal. And the worst case is Ireland, because the Irish people had to take over the debt of the Irish banks, and that added more than 150% of their GDP to their indebtedness.
Okay, let's pick up the main subject right now, which is the whole issue of bailouts. Do you think, at one level you ask for state intervention, more regulation, etc. On the other side, you've got this whole piece of bailouts. Across Europe, we've seen people just depend on bailouts, and it seems like it's a great backup for nations that are not able to manage their fiscal situation, they have debt, etc. Do you think there's a dichotomy out there? I mean, how do you put these together? The bailouts, which people are beginning to now realize, people, I mean countries, nation builders, the politicians, etc., are now thinking of bailouts as a possibility, as a real possibility. State intervention, on the other hand, is somewhat of a regulatory side of it. Are these complementary, or are they away from each other?
No, look, there has been a regulatory failure. In other words, the regulators failed to regulate the economy. That's why you had a crisis. And when you had a crisis, then they had to keep the financial institutions alive in order to prevent a total breakdown. And this creates what is called a moral hazard, which allows the financial institutions to indulge in excessive lending and excessive profits and excessive stimulation, because if things collapse, then the regulators have to pick up the pieces. Now, Alan Greenspan used to say that having to pick up the pieces is a small price to pay for having this kind of big stimulation. But after what happened in 2008, that is no longer so easy to argue.
Where does Asia fit in this scheme of your thinking?
This is a crisis of the developed countries, and the developing world is actually doing very well, and when compared to the developed world, it's doing exceptionally well, because the developing world is developing and the developed world actually sinking. So that, in that respect, this is actually the evening out of the gap between the developed and the developing world. And India is one of the beneficiaries of that. And India is actually unusual because its growth is mainly domestic, generated. So it's less exposed to the global situation. Less exposed, but still exposed.
And if you look at India in particular, I mean, we do know that it has a big role to play in Asia, but if you were to look at its role in, the global economic order, especially the one that you're trying to define, where you want to actually balance the developed versus the developing, the East versus the West. I mean, in many ways, this is a Western phenomenon, this whole issue of bailouts and need for higher regulation. India has always been ahead of the curve. We've been ahead of the curve in terms of tightening. We've been ahead of the curve in ensuring that when the recession was approaching us like a bit of a tsunami, we ensured that we were well in place with some amount of tightening or some amount of vigil that prevented us to get into a sport. Do you think that's been an ideal way to deal with it?
Yes. India's importance in the world has definitely risen, as a member of the G20, but since its economy is growing and it has considerable potential because it's coming from a very, very low base, over 1 billion people, not growing as fast as China, but perhaps not as exposed to overheating as China is. So India is actually relatively very well situated.
Are you happy with your investments in India? I know you don't want to talk about them in detail, but are you happy with them?
Yes.
Mr. Soros, it's an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. This is ET Now, and it would be our pleasure to have you back in India once again joining us on the show.
Pleasure.